Hi guys, it's Blackie. Okay, today in the Percussion Revolver series we're going to talk about when things get a little loose. Now, this is a UBERTI 1860 Army. This is my Shiloh. And it has a couple of problems from the factory, and this is true of many of the replicas. One of which is the fact that the base pin where it goes into the frame is a little loose. Did that rattle? Why does it happen this way? Well, it starts out, you got to understand how they're creating it. They have a machine that is going to be taking this and creating this base pin on the lathe. And on the end of this base pin, cylinder pin, or whatever you want to call it, the arbor or whatever, they're going to cut threads, usually with a tap, to screw into the frame. At the same time, right there in the frame is where there's going to be a hole drilled for it, and another machine with a tap on it is going to thread it. Now, in a perfect world, those two are very, very close in tolerance to each other. But what happens in real life is this. You start out with a tap that's going to make that hole, and it starts out brand new. It's as big as it's going to get, and every time it chambers and cuts those threads, it wears a little and gets a little bit smaller, so the hole gets a little bit tighter. We're talking about a couple of thousandths. Every time it cuts it in, every time it comes back out, it wears the tap just a little. And they're not doing this to do one frame, they're doing several hundred frames. And when that thing finally wears down to a certain point where the hole is really getting on the edge of being too small, they change it and go to a new one. Now, the thing making the end of the arbor that screws in, the tap that cuts the threads on that end, same thing. It starts out cutting them the smallest they're going to be, and as it wears, they get bigger because the opening inside that cutter is getting bigger, you see. So if I've got a cutter making this that's brand new, that thread is the smallest it's going to be. And if I've got a cutter on this one cutting this thread hole is getting worn and it's making the biggest hole, a small and a big go together and you get rattle, rattle, rattle. Even though it screws in there. But it's a couple of thousandths off, just enough that you can wiggle it just a little bit. Now, to keep them from unscrewing, right on top of it, they drill another hole and they put a pin in there. How to fix that? You're going to have to drill that pin out so you can unscrew this. I have not done this yet, and I may do it down the line, but right now it is not that detrimental to my accuracy, because it's actually shooting to point of aim really, really well and doing small groups. So I don't see the need to do it. Down the line I may, but at this time it's not affecting my accuracy, because when the barrel and cylinder is on there and the barrel is in the proper place in the wedge, it holds relatively the same place every time, so it's not wandering and making big groups. Okay? But another thing that was causing me problems with this, and it's very true of many of the cabin ball revolvers today for a similar thing, is the opening in the bottom of the barrel versus this. They're saying it's a short arbor, it's not going deep enough. Well, there's two sides to that coin. I can remember back in the early 80s when they created that hole for the arbor to go into, or the base pin as I prefer to call it to go into, was too tight. They didn't drill it quite deep enough, and yeah, you went down, it bottomed out, but they're not making a square bottom hole. It was a little bit rounded, and so you would put it up there and go to put it in position. It'd get just that short, and it wouldn't go home because it was binding up, and you had to beat on the end of the barrel in order to get it to finally go home to put the wedge in. Consequently, sometimes, especially after long firing strings, that thing had wedged back and forth, you'd pull the pin and you just about had to, pry the barrel off, because you had to use a loading lever to get enough leverage to pull this off. You couldn't pull it off by hand. And it was because that versus that tolerance was a little too tight and it was gripping it and making it very difficult to get the barrel off. So what UBERTI and a couple others did, but pretty much UBERTI, they made the depth just a grunt deeper so that this bottoms out here before there. And so when it comes together, it goes together easy and it comes apart easy. Now the cowboy action guys, they want these things to come apart easy. They want to hit that pin, be able to pull it apart, swap cylinders, whatever it is they got to do right quick. See, they don't want to have to beat the gun apart. And so that's one of the driving forces causing cowboy action shooting. That was a big deal. We have to be able to utilize the guns in matches where it was the guns apart and you got to put it together. And then, you know, load and shoot. Things like that. But with this one, and people talk about it, you can stick the barrel down onto the pin and it goes way down there. See? And that's true. It comes up and it bangs into it. Mine is fairly close, to be honest. But there was just a little bit of a hesitance there. When you come together, you tell it. Now, pull that wedge a little further out. There. So, in a quest to improve accuracy, there are several things you can do to fix that. Number one, if you had the skills and etc., is you chuck that up in a vise and you drill straight into the end. And then you drill and tap it and you put a large head, Allen head screw right there. Loctite it in place, and then you lightly file it till it fits correctly in there where you can just put it together and it's fully touching from the front and the back. That is absolutely going to do the job and take up that slack. What if I ain't got that kind of skill, Blackie? Well, I tell you what Blackie does. There's another little simple thing you can do, and that you need to put something in there that's going to hold tension between the barrel and that and keep it from flexing quite so much. Because as you know, with that wedge and that, when they're together right there and they fire, the barrel wants to go this way and the action wants to go that way, and that wedge keeps them together. But any back and forth flex affects accuracy. So I want them to kind of be held together, not just by the wedge, but touching forward and back. So put something down in that hole or put something on there. In the past, I have taken a steel BB, like shooting a BB gun, and I put it on a hard surface like an anvil with a hammer, went tap, 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 and kind of flattened it out where it looked like a tuna can a little bit, and it would be the right size, and then I would JB weld it to the end once I got it to the right size. I've done that in the past. But this is the super simplest way to do it, and it's what I do. This is a really small, don't drop it, lock washer. Now, I got a bigger one here so you can see it better. See, it's a split lock washer. This is just a small one. The small one is the size that when you put it up there, it's the size of the end of the pin right here. Now, Blackie, I want to know how big that is. Put you a little bit, take a pencil or something, rub that, take a piece of paper on a flat surface and bear down on it, and then leave a circle. You can take that piece of paper into the hardware store and you'll find a whole package of these hanging up where the washers are for like 97 cents or something like that for a dozen of them. Get you one of these, keep them in the shooting box. Now, what I do is I drop it flat down in that hole and make sure it's laying flat. Usually there's grease or something down in that hole and that'll stick it in place. Now, whenever I put the cylinder and the action together, like so, and I put that wedge in place, now the wedge doesn't want to go in as easily as it did before, and that's a way to tighten up that wedge a little. There we go. Now, there's no front to back. So like before there was a little now there ain't. Forward to back, no. I still got a little side to side because that loose back there at the back. But front to back is rock solid. And so that tightens it up. Now this is just a down and dirty way you can tighten it up yourself. When I go to take it apart, I need to make sure I push the barrel down, point the barrel down to pull the action off so I don't drop that washer. I keep a few in my shooting box just in case. If I do lose it, it's nothing to put it back. Plus, over time and shooting, that washer will collapse. That little twist will eventually, over pressure of firing over hundreds of rounds, may get kind of mashed down and not work like it did. So they're easily replaced. If you want to make it stay in there a little more permanent, clean the hole out inside the barrel as best you can. I take long Q-tips, clean it out with a board brush and stuff, clean it out, and then I want to take acetone on a Q-tip and clean that very bottom. Now I take my washer, and so you can see the two sides are offset. I take the side that's going to be on the bottom, and I put a little bit of JB Weld on that, and I take like a wooden chopstick or some little stick that I coat the end with Vaseline so that the JB Weld won't stick to it. Okay, I put it through the hole in that little washer, and I run it down there and I press it tight against the front and leave it under pressure for a half hour or so until that JB Weld sets up. Then I can twist the stick and pull the stick out, and that will leave that washer stuck in that front place pretty securely. Now, down the line when I need to replace it, all I got to do is just take a small tip flat screwdriver, run down there and hook it and twist and pop it out. It'll just pop free and I can replace it. Super simple. The last piece I'd like to touch on is about the wedge. The wedge is a sacrificable part in a Colt design. That was meant to be. So that as that barrel wanting to go this way and the frame wanting to go this way, that's two sides torquing on that wedge. And that wedge will take a pretty good battering. Okay? When you first get the wedge, you can barely get it in there. It's kind of tight, you know, and that's where it's supposed to be. But overshooting and battering, it gets a little bit pinged. It gets a little looser. And you'll notice that by how far it sticks in. Right now, this one, it goes in just enough for that spring to clip over. But if I beat on it, I could seat it deeper. I don't need to. That's just taking up the cylinder gap to keep everything tight. Look down here where your frame joins and make sure there's no gap there. As long as there's no gap there and this gap doesn't look bad, you're doing fine. When you tap it in and I can't seem to tighten it up anymore, that's when you need to take the wedge out, either replace it or put the wedge onto an anvil or a hard surface like a hammer face. And I've done this before where I've taken a hammer with the hammer part facing up, clamped it in a vise to use like a micro anvil. And then I've taken that wedge and got it up there and put it in place. And I've taken a ball peen hammer and go tap, 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 and kind of peen that, work peen that wedge out a little bit tighter. It don't take much. And it'll tighten the wedge back up so that that wedge can still work a while. Ultimately, just get a new one. But I normally order like 5 wedges at a time because they fit just about all the cap and balls as far as the 51s and the 44s except for the Dragoons or the pockets. And just get the standard wedge and utilize that. Have them on standby in case you lose a wedge or whatever. But by doing that, I can get some more life out of a wedge. I can do a little peening and just kind of flatten it out a little bit, and it works just fine. Hope these give you some ideas, guys, and help you improve with your project. Please leave any questions or comments down below, and I'll be happy to answer them. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.